Genuine security is achieved not just through the use of threat of force and physical restrictions, but by winning hearts and minds and creating conditions for peace, justice, and development. Its most effective form is a soft or preventive one that tackles the root cause of political violence by helping the poor, alienated, and marginalized to realize their human aspirations. In the light of political trends following the Cold War, this was after the First World War, 1914, 1918, Second World War, 1939, 1945, the Cold War, the incompleteness of the traditional notion of national security grew increasingly apparent. This traditional view on security relates to matters of external threats to the state, which subsequent on the Cold War became insufficient to identify the diverse aspects contained in the term security. In this regard, it was in particular the ultimate lack of attention to security of the individual that initiated a revision of the security. Main elements of the human security, the new global humanist perspective, the different goals set by United Nations, which was established on 24th October 1945, analyze the different variables implicated to human security, recognize the different yardsticks of measuring the human security. There was a Millennium Report on the human security. The Security General Millennium Report says that the world is progressing towards a new understanding of the concept of security, one synonymous with the defense of territory from external attack. The requirement of security today have come to embrace the protection of the communities and individuals from internal violence. The need for a more human-centered approach to security is reinforced by the continuing dangers that weapons of mass destruction, most notably nuclear weapons, pose to humanity. Their very name reveals their scope and their intent objective if they were ever used. The human security as a minimum is a number of interwoven dimensions centered on human dignity, personal and physical security, the rights of individuals and communities to preserve their own life and health and to dwell in a safe and sustainable environment. Economic security, access to employment and to the resources necessary to maintain one's existence with adequate measures taken to reduce maldistribution and artificial scarcity and to permit improvements in the material quality of community life. Social security providing protection from discrimination based on age, gender, ethnicity, or social status, combined with access to safety nets, knowledge, and information, as well as freedom of association. Political security, guaranteeing the rights of representation, autonomy, freedom, participation, and dissent, combined with empowerment to make choices and a reasonable probability of affecting change. This political dimension includes legal, judicial security, individual and collective access to justice, and protect from abuse. Ethnic and cultural security, a social climate in which minority population feels secure in expressing their cultural identity. The present situation at international level today, there are increased opportunities for cooperation in the international system and in various geographic regions. The revolution of communications, the new ways of democracies around the world, and globalization itself has contributed to universalizing the values and principles stipulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Promotion of and respect for declaration requires increased partnership and more cooperation approaching global politics from a human interest perspective allows one to compare value matrices. For example, if you consider the realism, corporate globalism, and global humanism, or realism, if there are negotiation, influence, mission, control, systems of alliance, hegemony, the corporate globalism is access, hierarchy, influence, consumption, capitalism, global culture, and for global humanism, accountability, management, equal opportunities, decentralization, basic needs, and interdependence. For a new global order, human security visualizes a new global order founded on values and norms intended to develop the global humanism. The core issue is to solve the population's basic needs. Third, human security visualizes a new global order founded on values and norms intended to develop the global humanism. The core issue is to solve the population's basic needs within the framework of globalization and interdependence. This delicate balance demands, on the one hand, a tendency to unify behavior, consumption, and ideals centered on universal values, and on the other, the requirement to recognize and respect diversity and particular identities and cultures. All of this is taking place in a context of economic and social polarization in various areas of the world. The result is local ungovernability, which transfers instability to the global system and the regional subsystems. Throughout today's world, traditional measures for protecting national security are failing to prevent tragic violations of the most basic aspects of human security. Territorial sovereignty and military capacity become scarcely relevant when human security concerns such as ethnicity, religion, the environment, governance, the economy, and human rights turn into the flashpoint for violent conflict. The failure of the models based on the national security perspective points to the urgent need for a new nodal based squarely on human security. Such a model would permit the UN national government to act quickly on early warning signals rather than permit the levels of atrocities we have witnessed in places such as Bosnia and Rwanda. A human security framework would alert appropriate actors the seeds of conflict well before they take the hold. Certain goals are set up by the United Nations. The goals set up by the United Nations established in 1945 for security is a world free from want and fear. Achieving this entails acknowledging a new set of international circumstances where state advance multiple threats that control confront the people. In the last few decades, interstate conflicts have declined, but there has been an increase in intrastate conflicts. The former Secretary General of UN, Kofi Annan's Millennium Report, Kofi Annan's Millennium Report entitled We the People stressed that more than 5 million people died in this type of internal war in the 1990s. There were also mass migrations, refugee crisis, destruction of infrastructure, and environmental changes. These events violate the basic human rights of millions of people and make it hard to create conditions for peace as the foundation for building a better world. The analysis from the United Nations indicates that conflicts are more frequent in regions with poor countries, so the challenge of protecting more vulnerable populations is even greater. This poses a global and regional dilemma regarding the most suitable mechanisms for achieving the stability, peace, and fostering cooperation. Even though one cannot completely disallow interventions by other powers in the name of humanitarian interventions, it has shown that in most cases it is not the best option for settling the conflicts. The same is true of the system of sanctions in the framework operations for maintaining and imposing peace must be reviewed. The international system has changed dramatically in less than a decade. Not only did the disappearance of Soviet Union definitely mark this change, but there were also substantial changes that accumulated over time and are expressed with particular strength in the post-Cold War context. The number of states actors participating in the institutionalized international system has multiplied by at least four times since the United Nations was set up in the 1945. We have seen the emergence of other actors with increasingly more influence on international relations, not just international agencies capable of changing their surroundings, but a series of transactional forces expressed with particular strength in multinational companies and non-governmental organizations. The communication explosion, technological advances, and globalization have further accelerated the changes. This has meant that the nature of state power has changed. Some of the basic areas are communications are no longer controlled by the state. The internet is the best example. Radio and television are also good. However, states do have some regulatory control, and authoritarian states still try and control communication. Technological developments depend more on the private sector than on the state. This affects investment capabilities from genetic techniques and cloning to technological developments designated for war. Financial transactions go around the world and generate a regional and global crisis with little capacities for intervention by the state. Although states reinsure investments, their ability to control decisions about where to invest and from where to go get investment is minimal. International migrations and the ability to control the movement of people have also diminished. Trade has increasingly opened up and states have evident problems to establish control and restrictions. The above means that threat perceptions have been generated that are different than traditional ones and mechanisms of actions to cope with them seems and in many cases actually are antiquated. At the same time, states continue to control national security and internal security, and in many cases, the state's control over civilians through security mechanisms, surveillance, and other means has actually increased. In other words, there has been rearrangement in state power. Before and during the Cold War, interstate conflict was the main threat, a conceptual transition is taking place from a Cold War perspective that visualized an enemy expressed in strongly military actions carried out by a state to a post-Cold War perspective in which threats are diffused and the weights of military factors has diminished, and many of the threats appear not to be linked to state actors and even not to be linked to any particular territory. Human security, an emerging concept in the present world. New vulnerabilities demand holistic perspectives. The concept of security at the beginning of the century can be articulated based on relating the concepts of international security, state security, and human security. The way in which the relationship is established will simultaneously meet global needs and the needs of the states and the people to the extent that vulnerabilities and threats to international security increase, pressure will be put on states to take action in a context where individuals and communities are at risk from all kinds of internal threats. Hence, it is essential to foster cooperative multilateralism or correspondent multilateralism. In turn, interstate crises and conflicts affect human security and international stability. So it is essential to achieve stability in interstate relations by diminishing the links. Four substantial elements needs to be emphasized when we think of the security. International security extends beyond its military components. International security is transnational, global, and interdependent. International security is produced by a plurality of actors. The state is no longer the exclusive actor, and international security in the 21st century has enlarged its agenda and demands that actors work together. Emphasis on which factor has primacy in the human security, state security, and international security trio may be very depending on the scenario. Most of the weights of coordination will fall on the state security because of the state continues to be the main international actor. Yet, some geographical regions, such as Africa, international security and its main actors could be a large center of influence. For example, the response capability of the international system might predominate in the face of political crisis in weak or disappearing states. Now, the preventive measures, the capacity to generate preventive measures is therefore central point of international action and of the governing agencies of the international and regional systems. In this regard, the United Nations faces the urgent challenge and necessity to establish efficient strategies in preventing long and short-term conflicts. Moreover, the United Nations is interested in increasingly targeting preventive actions in the sphere of international security as a crucial element in progressing towards a world free from fear. As the United Nations has bitterly and repeatedly discovered over the last decade, no amount of good intentions can substitute for the fundamental ability to project credible force if complex peacekeeping in particular is to succeed. The coercive measures. Human security has been taken forward to imply protection through the use of humanitarian interventions when large numbers of people are threatened by the state itself. In such a case, it is argued that international community can be involved and in the last resort use coercive measures including sanctions and military forces as in Bosnia and Kosovo. Human security may be analyzed and understood in different forms. Professor George Neff proposes at least five dimensions: ecology, economy, society, politics, and culture. Dear learners, I emphasize number one, ecology, number two, economy, number three, society, number four, politics, and fifth is the culture. Each of these variables can be visualized at different levels. They are linked mainly to two crucial elements, globalization and the use of force. Examining these variables enable us to target and structure policy recommendations based on a concept such as human security that is still being developed and discussed. A vision of the future is essential. A vision for the future is certainly essential. In the framework within the international system, current period, different global concepts in specific areas such as security have to be taken into consideration. A sense of urgency must also be cultivated as an essential component of the human centered approach. The readiness for action would help reach the goal of developing preventive measures for conflict resolution, as advocated by the UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali in his Agenda for Peace. The moral imperative used to justify a nation's decision to resort to force is the preservation of state stability. In other words, maintaining the rule of law. In the case of human security, the moral imperative for action is the preservation of human dignity in all the dimensions. If these dimensions of human security to greater priority in the risk analysis of national and international actors, it could at the same time go some way towards meeting crucial objectives of both sustainable development and the global security. Dear learners, some of the questions at the term and exam could be: discuss the variables implicated in the human security, and what are the different goals set by the United Nations, or what are the different yardsticks of measuring the human security. The global state of human security. The United Nations was born into a world emerging from the shadows of war and hitherto unimagined destruction. The organization was founded on the ideals of peace and justice, with an international system of law and procedures which would replace military aggression and war with negotiation and collective security. Although the UN was fundamentally constructed around the concept of national sovereignty, it could also be argued that from the very start, the security of the people was of equal importance. The UN Charter's past word states in no uncertain terms that we, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime and has brought untold sorrow to the mankind. It was in the Charter of the United Nations. The United Nations played a crucial role because there were two world wars: the World War First, World War Second, and security region was at most in the minds of the United Nations. And United Nations rightly was taking care of all these aspects. However, there was some drastic changes during the Cold War period. The dominant concept of security at the time was state-centric, privileging the instruments and agents of the state, carrying forward the principles of state sovereignty as first articulated in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The UN principles for security were initially focused on ways in which the structures and practices of the modern state might address threats to the sovereignty. These threats encompassed com- compromises to territorial integrity, issues surrounding political stability, military and defense arrangements, and economic and financial activities. The behavior of states was understood rationally as the pursuit of power To that extent, the security calculus was based on a zero sum outcome, with gains on one side coming only as a result of losses on the other. The realist approach to security was most sharply applied in the relation between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic from the onset of the Cold War in the 1950s. In the years that followed, attempts to mediate the US and the former USSR probably presented the most difficult test for the UN and its mandate. Operating in a world perilously close to a devastating nuclear confrontation forced the organization to develop innovative and creative solutions to some to seemingly intractable problems, such as limiting the threats posed by the nuclear arsenals stockpiled by each superpower. The UN's role in disarmament led to the establishment of standards such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty 1968, the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty 1972, the Biological Weapons Convention 1972, and the Chemical Weapons Convention 1993. Dear learners, for your term and exam is very important, and I am again repeating the UN's role in disarmament led the establishment of standards such as Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty 68, the Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty 1972, the Biological Weapons Convention 1972, and the Chemical Weapons Convention 1993. Since the principal target of these weapons were communities and by extension individuals, it could be argued that although states, the states had the principal responsibilities for actions and the individuals and communities were ultimately the main beneficiaries of these UN-led initiatives. With the end of the Cold War and the demise of the Soviet Union over 1989, 1991, the strategy of dealing with the conflicts by the UN shifted from containment to prevention. In 1992, the UN Secretary General issued an agenda for peace, peacemaking, and peacekeeping. Buttress Ghali 1992 early optimism for a more peaceful world was, however, dashed by the rising number of in developing countries. These were overwhelmingly internal conflicts, though sometimes national groups received external support. Most of these conflicts Okay, in an attempt to address these informations, the UN system once more engaged with alternative views, articulating the concept in terms of a reframed emphasis on empowerment of individuals by addressing system, policies, and practices that contributed to insecurity, despite having embodied the concept of collective security since its inception and witnessed the transformation of the concept beyond its original parameters during the Cold War. The idea of human security is as old and derives from the many idealists and moral thinkers, but the modern concept of human security emerging as part of the holistic paradigm of human development cultivated in the UNDP by Mehboobull Haq with strong support from Amartya Sen. The UNDP 1994 Human Development Report was the first major international document to articulate human security in conceptual terms with proposals for policy and action. Though this marked the most high-profile launching of the concept of approach, Mehbul Haq and several others involved in 1994 had in fact explored the topic at a North-South roundtable on the economies of peace held in Costa Rica in January 1990s. The roundtable produced a clear statement that the post-Cold War was needed a new concept of global security with the orientation. So, as I was telling, the essence of the human security presents an effort to reconceptualize security in a fundamental manner. It is primarily an analytical tool which focuses on ensuring security for the individual, not the state, exploring the options aimed at mitigating threats to the insecurity of individuals. Thus, becomes a central goal of policy, recommendation, and actions. In line with the expanded definition of human security, the causes of insecurity are subsequently broadened to include threats to socio-economic and political conditions, food, health, environmental, community, and personal safety. Policy initiatives generated through the application of the human security frameworks have incorporated considerations far beyond the traditional focus on military force, greatly reducing the emphasis on armies, if not replacing them altogether. Human security is therefore people centered, multidimensional, interconnected, universal. In principles, human security reflects the aggregate gains as a result of the mitigation of each of the and every actor who are contributing to it. Now, there is a need to focus on the core issue, a country by country approach, as with the NSDR help to do this. For example, realizing human security in Afghanistan and should involve policies which address democratic governance, transnational crime, human rights, poverty, and basic needs. The human security, I have already shared the links with others for your kind information. The human security needs of the people of Mozambique could and likely would include protection from external regional conflicts, socio-economic exploitation, civil unrest stemming from ethnic identities, poverty, and public health issues such as HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis. Each of these country cases therefore represents subsets of human security linked together by the common conditions of insecurity, which manifests itself in decidedly different terms of reference for both Afghanistan and Mozambique. In each case, the drive to eliminate insecurity is informed by considerations of human development and human rights and not strategic calculations. I have already shared the link with the persons of power and military gains and advantages. Through this framework, it would therefore be possible to develop a collective policies which successfully address the specific insecurities in each country while ensuring that the primary beneficiaries of these policies are individuals, not the state. As a result, state security becomes a direct reflection of the perception of security of its citizens. It is important to recognize when human security framework is most useful in the analysis. For instance, attempting to locate human security within the superpower rivalry of the Cold War world order does not demonstrate the theoretical strength of the framework. As such, in case where security threats to the state are addressed through actions aimed at external state-based actors, traditional security studies appears better situated to undertake effective analysis. For example, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi regime by the US-led coalition is far better understood through a traditional security lens. The resultant impact of US Army action on the population of Iraq are, however, much better understood through the human security framework. The traditional security versus the human security. The traditional security paradigm refers to the realist construct of security in which the referent object of security is the state. The prevalence of this theorem reached a peak during the Cold War. For almost half a century, major world powers entrusted the security of their nation to a balance of power among states. In this sense, international stability relied on the premise that if state security is maintained, then the security of the citizens will be followed. Traditional security relied on the anarchist balance of power, military built up between the US and the Soviet Union, the two superpowers, and on the absolute sovereignty of the nation state. States were deemed to be rational entities, national interests, and policy driven by the desire for absolute power. Security was seen as protection from invasion executed during the proxy conflicts using technical and military capabilities. Human security, then putting people and not only states as the focus of security analysis is a catastrophe of Canadian foreign policy. In the United Nations and elsewhere, Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Oxworthy has brought this dialogue to the world stage of numerous occasions, a hallmark of the changing nature of violent conflict and the new generation of transnational human security threats is that they increasingly put people at the center of world affairs. Human security as a term can be understood to encompass the concept of conflict prevention, crisis management, and civil military coordination, but it makes it takes them further. It draws on a debate generated by the concepts as well as other terms used more broadly in current global discourse, such as responsibility to protect, effective multilateralism, and human development. Insecurity is closely related to crisis. Human security can be treated as a crisis under terms such as human rights and human development. It has to be do with the human need at moments of extreme vulnerability, not only in war, but in the face of natural and technological disaster as well. The concept framework of the report is rooted in the UNDP 1994 Global Human Development Report, New Dimensions of Human Security. It identified seven interdependent threats to human security and urged that human security can only be a reality if all threats are taken seriously and acted on without any hierarchy. The human security in South Asia. At the end of the Cold War was celebrated among many circles as an end to the conflict, determined pattern of global relations, which would ensure greater cooperation and peace. People were mistaken with the number of interstate conflicts suddenly came down in the post-Cold War years. The extremely induced factors as well as the rising incidence of collapsing internal institutions witnessed the rise of intrastate conflicts of various types. One is perhaps forced to acknowledge at least partial validity of the prophecy made by John Jay, who argued in 1990 in a different context that we will soon be missing the order of the Cold War years as we leap into untamed anarchy. In cases of such internal conflicts, the most alarming fact has been the increasing incidence of state failures in terms of ensuring supply of public goods to their citizens. The most critical failure in this connection arguably has been the relative failure of the states in ensuring security for the citizens. Genesis of the concept of human security. The most important forerunners of the idea of human security were the reports of a series of multinational interdependent commissions of prominent leaders, intellectuals, and academicians. Beginning in 1970s, the Club of Rome group produced a series of volumes on the world problematic, which were premised on a complex and problems troubling men of all nations, poverty, unemployment, inflation, and other monetary and economic disruptions. In the 1980s, two other independent commissions contributed to the changing thinking on the development and security. The Independent Commission on International Development issued chaired by Willy Brandt, which issued the North-South Report. The Independent Commission chaired by Olof Palme, who chaired the famous Common Security Report, which drew attention to alternative ways of thinking about peace and security. It acknowledged that third world security was additionally threatened by poverty and deprivation. There was in 1991 the Stockholm Initiative on Global Security, the Global Neighborhood Report 1994. The human security is not a concern. The human security is not a concern with weapons. It is a concern with human life and dignity. It is concerned with how people live and breathe in a society, how freely they exercise their many choices, how much access they have to market and social opportunities, and whether they live in comfort and in peace. The report listed seven components of human security: economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, fifth, the personal security, sixth, the community security, and the political security. It further distinguished between the localized, global, and international threats, endorsing changes in national and international policy focused on basic needs, productive and remunerative employment, and human rights. Overlapping the UNDP report, two other schools of thought contributed their perceptions on human security. The Canadian-led Middle Powers approach to human security, 1997, and the Norway organized Middle Power Conference in Lisbon, 1999. While the Canadian school cited, among others, the income gap between the rich and the poor countries, the religious and ethnic discord, state repressions, the widespread use of anti-personnel landmines, and an unstable protectionist international trading system. The 1999 paper refers to the danger posed by civil conflicts, large-scale atrocities, and genocide. Both the UNDP and the Canadian school concentrated on the individual as the referent of security. Many of the challenges thrive in areas that lack strong state structures in terms of both national cohesiveness and established a system of civil and legal justice. The regions contain a number of ethno religious minorities that are experiencing erosion of their traditional authority, owing to the process of modernization that has been imposed on them by the majority to consolidate its dominance over the state. The resulting sense of insecurity and alienation has drawn many groups towards radical militancy. Most of the South and Southeast Asian countries exhibit strong resistance towards intrusive and interventionist law enforcement mechanisms, the norm of non-interference in internal affairs within the 1976 Treaty of Amity and Cooperation remains extremely strong in the mindset of the member countries of ASEAN, while the principles of unanimity in the decision-making process of SARC has virtually kept bilateral problems outside the ambit of the organization. The human security and South Asia. The South Asian region, inhabited by more than one-fifth of global population, is afflicted by a number of social, political, and economic problems, compounded by political mistrust and suspicion. The region is plagued by interstate conflicts over boundaries. Besides, intrastate conflicts in recent decades have spilled over into neighbors' territories. There is hardly a single state in South Asia which has not been affected by trans-border spilling of ethno-nationalist, communal, and militant activity. In addition, the region has witnessed a sharp increase in unemployment, poverty, epidemics, drug trafficking, and environmental degradation. All these issues pose a far more serious and immediate challenge to the security of the society. People have suffered more from internal conflicts within the countries than in wars between countries in the past 2 decades. Terrorism is another crucial factor. Terrorism in South Asia is part sponsored, part homegrown, and part induced by decades of alienation created due to historical and economic reasons. It is no doubt that terror attacks here are more extensive and gory than they are Southeast Asia. This stems in large part from closer geographical proximity to West Asia, strengthened by the presence of Al Qaeda based in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It is also a function of long term conflict in Afghanistan and Kashmir. The extremist Taliban regime gave sanctuary to Al Qaeda operating, working in these conflict zones. With the result, the remnant Al Qaeda forces have linked up with the extremist groups, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Jahangir, to achieve their ultimate goal of setting up an Armada array of schools, madrasas, training professional fanatics has exported these corporate jihadis to strike at the heart of the city centers in South Asia. Unabated flow of illegal weapons in Chittagong's Cox's Bazar area of Bangladesh. The fact that millions of young Bangladeshis are influenced by the fanatics and evidence that the intelligence wings of those states that sponsor terrorism have a stronghold within the Dhaka leaves the possibilities of Bangladesh turning into next Afghanistan substantially high on the honors of the present government to chalk a balancing act to keep the extremist force as well as the moderate voice quietly under control. The two world wars, the first from 1914 to 1918, concluded with the Treaty of Versailles, but it had the seeds for the Second World War because the treaty was forced upon the people. Subsequently, there was the League of Nations, but the League of Nations also failed owing to the rise of fascism and fascism in Italy and Nazism in Germany, and the seeds were sown for the Second World War from 1939 to 1945. While the dissimilarities overshadow the similarities and it continued. The overshadows the similarities in the trends of evolutionary terrorism in South and Southeast Asia. The most striking similarities between these two regions are the facts that both have porous borders with lax immigration, law and other administrative loopholes, corruption and nepotism. Both are mostly democracies with secular forces, and both are encircled by weak to medium powers. The most striking dissimilarity between the two regions exists in the presence of a much weaker South Asian organization, SARC, much happening Southeast Asian one, the ASEAN, while SARC seems to be enmeshed in too many bilateral disputes, the Indo-Pak disputes looming high on all of them, its principles of unanimity in the decision-making process has deterred the smooth functioning of the organization substantially with special emphasis on the human security issues of direct, indirect, and asymmetrical threats. The fighting of insurgency, the Indian context, like terrorism, insurgency against the state has been a familiar problem the region of South Asia and nearly all nation states belonging to the region continuing to face it. It is, however, generally accepted that within the regions, India has been able to tackle the insurgency questions in a far more satisfactory manner than the other countries. Insurgency has been a festering problem since the emergence of India as a separate state in 1947. Apart from ethno-religion based separated movements like in the northeastern parts of India, the Punjab, or in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, India also continues to experience insurgencies based on radical political, ideological based movements like the Naxalite movements. The general principles of the Indian states has been to use force against the group advocating or practicing violent methods in order to realize their objectives. The post-Cold War developments have had their impact in the South Asian region also, making the task of dealing with insurgency more difficult. Such new trends have been considered important enough for the Indian Army, for instance, to come out with its own manual on sub-conventional warfare in 2006. The manual brought out by the Indian Army defines sub-conventional warfare as a generic term encompassing all armed conflicts. I have already invited the audience to come and join. It includes military insurgency, proxy war, and terrorism that may be employed as a means in an insurrectionist movement or undertaken independently. The main aim of such operation is conflict resolution through the process of winning the hearts and minds of the people. Naturally, such efforts can't be achieved through military operations alone, but involve greater interagency, coordination, and minimum emphasis on violence. Thus, the South Asia provides a grim portrayal of the social, economic, political facets of development and nerve-cracking threats to security. The emerging security order reveals a multitude of fault lines, political, economic, social, and environmental, cultural, scientific, and technological. These faults overlap partially and often shift in direction. They sometimes reinforce each other and at other times work at cross purposes. The overall picture they present is one of the turbulence and uncertainty in which a variety of contradictory processes unlock a wide range of both opportunities and threats. Define the established security order, integration and exclusion coexist apprehensively side by side in all domains and aspects of the security order. This is an order that is regional but not integrated, that puts all in contact with one another while simultaneously maintaining a wide gap between nations and between peoples within countries, thus benefiting only a small percentage of the region's population. However, it will be erroneous to conclude that there cannot be strategic, premeditated conquered in South Asia. The shifting gamut also provides an opportunity to build a cohesive South Asian, thus the analogous to the security problem of South Asia. The solution also appears to be intrinsically interrelated. The challenges now is to develop the security architecture of South Asia and afford political and economic energies to the processes of problems of solving. To accelerate wide-ranging regional security operations today, the security demands expanding economic cooperation wherever possible and making sustained efforts to resolve political disputes. The focus of the security discourse in South Asia must be shifted from national security to people's security. Some of the questions you may face in a term and exam, I am worried that examine some of the human security problems of South Asia, write short notes on the human security and poverty eradication, environmental security, India's fight with insurgency. With some of the learners, if you are unable to join, I will again, because things are also noted down and you can also contact me. Anyway, it means creating political, social, environmental, economic, military, and cultural systems that give people the building blocks of survival, livelihood, and dignity. There are strong imperatives to work together despite differences in the security perceptions. But it appears that South Asian regional policy experts currently do not recognize this given the geographic proximity, political, social, cultural, and economic complementaries. This region become the greatest powerhouse. The human security in India, the Indian scenario, the concept, meaning, nature, and scope of the human security have been dealt after the Cold War. Human security in South Asia has dealt with various dimensions. There is little doubt that many of the security threats facing the world in the 21st century revolved around issues such as poverty, underdevelopment, inequality, environmental degradation, climate change, pandemics, illegal migration, people smuggling, drug trafficking, and conflict arising from poor governance leading to state failure. While these threats are not new in an era of advancing globalization, they are, I heard, already shared and invited you. Please join and take a note. Whatever I'm saying, they are very important for your term and exam. The globalization, they are increasingly transitional and interlinked in nature. Moreover, these threats directly and deeply affect the safety and well-being of the people, even when the system of states that comprise the contemporary international order may remain superficially stable. The international community, therefore, needs to rethink the concept of what security means and how best to realize it. A comprehensive, people-centric understanding of security is warranted as a more appropriate framework of reference and action for today's world. Then, sorry, then the traditional notion of national security. Human security has thus assumed a completely different dimensions as opposed to the traditional concept or pattern of security. Political security. The state is primarily responsible for ensuring the security and make sure that the apparatus is well equipped to deal. I have already shared with you. Please hurry up and join in the concluding portion if you have somehow missed it. It is all well equipped to deal with any kind of eventuality. India's territorial integrity has been closely guarded even since ever since its independence. The strategic position of India has made it vulnerable to threats from many quarters. The challenges of keeping the nation integrated have been numerous and have been put to test from time to time. India's northern side and northeastern side have been particularly vulnerable, and the insurgent and militant groups have been consistently making attempts to destabilize the nation. The challenges are many in the task. The state's capacity to cope with the untoward incidents often breaks down. Government officials infrequently perform their duties. Law and order enforcing agencies often face hurdles in the remote areas from where the insurgent militant groups operate. Parallel governments are run especially in the Naxalite, Maoist, violence-prone areas. Further, there are challenges relating to the preventing the proliferation of small arms, drugs, and trafficking. Many experts propounded human development as a prerequisite for human security, as the inequalities tend to take the downward turn due to enhanced development levels and availability of basic needs. The availability induces a security factor that prevents crime rates from soaring. It is therefore necessary that the policymakers keep in mind those measures that ensure welfare for all. Economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, and the individual and community security are highly essential in the days. In India, the list of susceptible groups is broadly classified into minorities and specifically all the more deprived people from different sections of the society. These include caste and tribal groups, women and children, while the issues relating these groups are part of the system and are prone to structural violence. Further, when it comes to poverty and hunger, it afflicts all the poor and makes them the most vulnerable in society, fighting against their own system that have created imbalances at various stages. Further, there is a major deviation and is manifested mostly in rural areas. The backward communities often face social differentiation and inequality and are most deprived sections in the society. These groups do not have access to essential social and economic goods, and the discrimination towards them is mostly due to the imbalanced stratification of society, that is, based on caste, class, and religion. Their isolation from the mainstream for ages has made them vulnerable to the core. Another important thing is the human development. Human development is a crucial factor. It is important to cite what Chennai observed in this regard. Human development or lack thereof is critical to sustain certain level of human security, downturns in development, and extreme poverty almost systematically, triggering conflict whether upon through warfare or through growing social unrest, tension, and stress. Progress in human development will enhance the chance of progress in human security, while failure in human development will increase the risk of failure in human security. From a practical standpoint as well, most aspects of the maximalist definitions of human security simply cannot be delivered without a level of pre-existing development. The human security, for instance, for social safety, needs to mitigate downturns. Most acknowledge that setting up such institutions needs an already relatively significant level of development and state stability to finance such social security and economic security schemes. Only progress in the developmental field can bring the capacities to them. make sure through human security that no steps are made backwards and no one lags behind. One must be assured of protection from calamities, wars, poverty, hunger, or displacement. Gentlemen, displacement also is playing a vital role in human development and human security. Development will take place only when there is an ambience of peace and security. For example, many civil wars or disturbances leads to little or no development and vice versa, wherein the absence of development is likely to trigger a conflict. Symptoms like political instability, economic deprivation, social unrest, eroding of cultural factors, displacement, and weakened state institutions do lead to massive human insecurity conditions. These conflicts, all states alike, be developed, developing, rich or poor, the quality of human development and human security, a development in the promotion of peace and harmony in society that is sustainable in nature. Father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, rightly pointed out seven social sins would contribute to imbalance in society. These are politics without principles. Number one, politics without principles. Number two, wealth without work. Number three, knowledge without character. Number four, commerce without morality. Pleasure without conscience. Science without humanity. And worship without sacrifice. If you have, if you have no sacrifice, then worship is meaningless. And that has to be taken care of. And Gandhiji has highlighted in clear terms. And as father of the nation, he has done it not only for India, but for the whole world. Somehow, I feel how such a stalwart like our father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, whose name was forwarded for Nobel Peace Prize, very narrowly missed it. But though he did not get it, he is revered as the Mahatma, that is the father of the nation. And all should toe in line and follow the principles of the Mahatma in day to day activity. For the economic security, possible intervention and assistance by the international donors, relief aid and public aids, microcredit projects, poverty eradication strategies, safety nets, and social welfare programs, FDI, and long term investments, trade facilitation, debt relief. Possible positive externalities: increase in income, social inclusion, empowerment of women, boosting the private sector, reducing inequality, food security. Threats stem from hunger, famines, and the lack of physical and economic access to basic food. Possible interventions: public food distribution system, crop distribution, midday meals, food for work programs. Possible positive externalities: hunger relief, increased and improved agriculture. Possible negative externalities: discourage local agriculture, affect the population metabolism. Crop might not meet the soil condition. Food distribution may be inequitable. Health security, the possible interventions: rebuilding the public health care system, technical cooperation, health education programs, safe and affordable family planning, primary care, prevention strategies, regulating private health, environmental security. The environmental securities: installing environmental sound management practices, environmental awareness program, implementing strict environmental laws, cleaning community water resources. Possible positive externalities: recovering waste and polluted renewable resources, introducing environmental friendly technologies.